All right, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you all for coming to this session. We're going to start with some quick introductions and then jump right in so that we can make the most of our time with you. My name is Anna. I am here from Dartmouth College. I was born and raised in Vermont and live in Vermont, but I hop over the border into New Hampshire to go to work every day. And I'm excited to speak with you kind of broadly about the admissions process. I've worked at 3 different institutions that have kind of a different approach at each one, but are all generally on the kind of more selective, holistic admissions review side of U.S. universities.
Hi, everybody. My name's Jack Lareau. I am coming to you from Vermont State University. I'm a Vermont transplant from Michigan. Before I was in admissions, I did some general college advising for high school students. So just the same, happy to talk to you generally kind of about the college application process.
And this is not going to be an info session for either of our institutions. One of the things that I enjoy about this is having 2 pretty different institutions to illustrate the fact that there is no one-size-fits-all for the admissions process. And that can be really frustrating on your side, and I understand that. But hopefully this will help you see kind of some of the different approaches and help you think about what you're going to have in mind as you're going through this process. So we're going to talk first about sort of the search process and getting started on that side, and then we'll jump into the actual application process after that. So the search process, how many of you are in grade 10 or younger? A bunch. Any 11? Any 12? Not so much. Okay, great. So everyone is kind of somewhere in the search process. For any of you, is this the start of your college search or thinking about college process? Awesome. And a lot of you say no. Okay. So one of the things that I think is really important at the beginning of this process that a lot of students skip is the idea of looking inward and thinking about what do you want out of this process. And one of the questions that I think a lot of students don't think about, some students might, is why am I even going to college? What do I want to get out of that? Do I need to go to college? For some students, the answer might be no. For some students, the answer is, I know I want to go to college, but I haven't really thought about why I want to go to college. It's just what comes after high school, and it's what's always kind of been on the path. Sometimes that conversation is informed by your parents' experiences, sometimes it's friends, other folks, but I think that's a really important question to be asking yourself. When you're thinking about the college search, thinking about your sources and resources, the people that you're going to, the websites. Has anyone gone to the VSAC table over here? There are a bunch of handouts there. If you haven't stopped by there, go and just pick up one of everything. They've also got them all on their website. And also go to our websites, find the resources that we have on our websites. And do you want to speak at all about kind of if someone's trying to learn about Vermont State University, some resources that they can find from you guys, or how they might go about that?
I think just generally, I guess specifically for Vermont State University, but any college that you're looking at, their college websites are going to be a pretty good source of information that's just general, specific to the colleges that you're looking at, and it helps you get a vibe of the personality of the colleges that you're exploring, and it's a good first step to make sure that it's the right fit for you in that self-reflection piece.
Yeah. And I think there's a difference between going to myself or Jack and asking what is the admissions policy on this and what is the rule on this and what is the process. But then sometimes I have students coming to me saying, what's it like being a student at Dartmouth on the weekends? What do you do for fun? I go home on the weekends. I don't stay at Dartmouth on the weekends. I'm not hanging out with students. That's a great question to ask our students. And so that's where you might go on to a college's website and find, is there a blog? Is there a way that you can email students directly? But when you're considering those sources and resources, please pay attention to where they're coming from, because there are some great kind of online resources that are not through the college maybe that you can get that perspective, but there are also some that have horrible information, or it's one student who had a really bad experience and they want to complain about that, and that's not a representative voice for the college or institution. So be mindful of that. Like when you're consuming any information, consider what those sources and resources are. If you ever find someone who says, I know the secret to getting into this place, move away from that resource immediately, because they are probably trying to take your money and it's probably a scam. This idea of like independence and responsibility, there are a lot of parents and supporters in the room here. The student is the driver of this process. The parent is a very important co-pilot, oftentimes a funder also maybe. And so it's important to have a parent or supporter maybe as a partner, but it's really important for the student to be the driver of this. And part of that means thinking about deadlines, thinking about what needs to get submitted. If I get an email from a student, a month after the deadline saying, but nobody told me, that's part of your responsibility in this research process.
And that's something to keep in mind too. Like when you fill out those requests for information from colleges, a lot of times those are directed directly to the students who fill out those requests. So parents might sometimes be out of the loop unless there's a specific parent-focused like communication coming from the different colleges that you're looking at.
Yeah. Finding your supporters. If you are just at the beginning of this, think about who are those folks. Is there a family member? Is there a parent who's going to be part of this process? Consider sitting down and having a conversation about those roles and what the student is hoping to get out of this process and what the parent is hoping to get out of this process. Maybe there's an older sibling that has gone through this that can also be a resource. Certainly check with your school. Think about, is there a college counselor in my high school? What do they see their job as, and what is their job not? And what goes back on the student or the parent. So figure out who those folks are. Keep in mind external resources like VSAC, especially if you're thinking about funding. There are a lot of websites, we'll put some up at the end, that can also kind of fill that gap. We know that some folks are at schools where there is one or multiple people who are dedicated university advising staff who are there to help you. Other students are at schools where there might be one person who is a counselor, and they are covering a lot of ground for a lot of students. And sometimes I find that there are some students who don't have very much interaction with that counselor. And the counselor says, yeah, I'm gonna help you get those documents in, but I don't have time to maybe sit down with you and have all these other conversations. And that might be a time where you're kind of finding some other supporters that can fill in that role. And keep in mind that we are also part of that team. Our offices, maybe not us individually, but we have resources on our websites. You can potentially come in, meet with us, but take advantage of the resources of our offices.
Many high schools in Vermont also have VSAC outreach coordinators who are in my experience, they are very good about advocating for the students that they work with. So if you're at a high school that has a VSAC counselor who is resident at that high school, definitely take advantage of them, because they can help you communicate with the admissions offices of the places that you're looking at.
Yeah. Sometimes that means that the student needs to kind of take a step towards those resources. Sometimes it's literally just going into that office at your school saying, I want to go to college, I don't know where to start, what can I be doing? Or asking, is there a VSAC coordinator here? But that is part of your responsibility and this independence of taking a step towards those resources. And that is something you will also find in university, is that we have a lot of support and resources. You are gonna need to take a step towards that sometimes. That doesn't mean you're gonna be navigating it on your own, but you need to learn how to be an advocate for yourself. So this is a great time to be practicing that.
The squeaky wheel gets the grease.
Yes. So the next thing, there is a handout at the VSAC table for this, but having some sort of system to start to gather information, map out deadlines, requirements. Do you need to take tests for that university or no? What is the deadline? Is it January 1st or is it earlier, later? Is there some opportunity, a special scholarship that you want to be applying for that has an earlier deadline? Start keeping track of that. If you're someone who loves spreadsheets, then maybe that's how you're doing it. If you are more of a bullet journaler, then maybe you're doing it some other way, but figure out a system that is going to work for you, because it is a lot of different information that you're going to be keeping track of.
An older school way, if you like to print out everything, is if you get one of those, it's like an accordion kind of file folder. As high school students, that's really helpful to keep track of all the correspondence that colleges might be sending to you. And then after you graduate, once you've kind of made your decision, you know what you want to do, you have it. You don't have to keep the college stuff in there, but you can use it for like taxes, vital documents and stuff, so it helps you with your first steps going into adulting.
I have my taxes in one of those right now. All right, and then also for organizing college correspondence, I know that we can send you a lot of stuff. It can get really annoying. You can always opt out of emails, but consider if you are someone who does not kind of keep an eye on emails, maybe you set up a whole email account that is just Anna goes to college or something like that, where all of those things, when you're registering for campus visits, that's all coming in there. Just keep in mind that that is then, when you're applying, that is the email address that we're using for important reminders, other things. So if you're setting that up, then that is something that you are staying on top of to a certain extent, and figuring out how to manage that kind of flow of communication. All right, so now let's get into the more fun part. When you're thinking about where do you want to go, where do you start? So this is where that self-reflection and taking a little bit of inventory of what matters to you is important. Do you want to speak on some of the things that, I don't know if you want to share like your own experience or something, but what are some things that might matter to students?
So a lot of times, like students, we ask them how far away from home they want to go. There's usually a radius. A lot of the students that I've talked to today are like, I want to be no closer than 2 hours away from where I grew up so that my parents can't surprise me. So yeah, it's stuff like that. Think about like, are you comfortable in big crowds? That might lead you towards more of a bigger school, small school. If you're interested in sports, you can start to kind of look at the different divisions that offer varsity sports at the colleges that you go to. Keep in mind, like D2 and D1 can offer athletic scholarships, but D3 generally does not. Are you looking for specific clubs? What do you want your campus to look like? Big city, small city? There's a whole bunch of stuff. So this graph is awesome for kind of determining what sort of things you're looking for in a college campus. I would give my students a bingo card that they would take with onto college campuses, and they can kind of stamp everything. But this goes back to the self-reflection piece. What do you want out of your college experience?
And I would think of this as kind of a dual matrix of what do you want and how important is it? Mm-hmm. So do you want this kind of club or experience, but if it doesn't have it, it's not that important? Or is that like a must-have, that I do not want to be at a place that doesn't have great vegetarian options in the dining hall, because if I can't have meals that I enjoy every day, I'm going to be a miserable, unhappy person, even if I'm getting A's in all my classes. So thinking about what is it that you care about and how flexible are you on that. If you're not sure where to start with this, something that can be really helpful is to plan out some visits that expose you to a lot of these things. And for those of you in the room here, what that might look like is a visit to Vermont State, maybe to one or multiple campuses, a visit to Dartmouth, a visit to Middlebury, a visit to UVM, maybe some of the other schools in Burlington. Those are very different styles of institutions. Some are highly residential, some are majority commuter, some are large research universities, some are very small liberal arts campuses. Some have a whole range of academic programs. Some have academic programs that are highly specialized in a particular area. And even if you then decide, I actually want to go to school in California, you then have a starting place of, I want to go to school in California, but I really want to be at a smaller campus where when I'm walking around, I'm recognizing a lot of people. Or I want to be at a huge place that feels like I'm in a city. So that can be a way to kind of start, because I think sometimes this is really hard to just like abstractly figure out. I remember my college counselor in high school found me really frustrating because they were like, do you want to be at a big school or a little school? And I was like, yeah, either. And they're like, do you want to be on the East Coast or the West Coast? And I was like, yeah, sure, one of those. maybe somewhere in the middle. And they're like, what do you want to study? And I was like, I don't know. And they're like, okay. So there are tools also that help with this. So College Board, which is the company that does the SAT, on their website they have a tool called Big Future, and you can put in different things like, I want a school that is this size, that is within X miles of this location, that has these kinds of things, and it'll kind of come up with these filtered lists. So that can also be a place that you're starting to sort of explore. This is also something that if you're visiting schools, keep a mental tab on moments that you kind of think to yourself, ooh, that's cool. I didn't know you could do that. I would want to do that. Or things that you're like, that's not really my scene. And that will help you kind of build this list as well. Going back to that one more time, I could talk for hours on this stuff. I really love doing these programs. I think that the most important sort of takeaway from that is that by doing that, you are building your own ranking list. So you're not going to someone else's ranking list. You are deciding what matters to me, what do I care about, and then you are measuring us against that. There are over 4,000 colleges and universities in the United States alone. Some of you may even be looking beyond the United States. And that's a lot to choose from. So you are making some decisions about how we measure up to your criteria. And that's something that no other ranking list is going to be able to be personalized to your interests in that way. Do you want to talk a little bit about junior year stuff?
Yeah, so junior year stuff, that's generally when we would recommend that you start building out your college list. These are the ones that you're interested in. Sometimes we like to spread out which ones so that you pick 2 schools that you're based on your academics and your extracurriculars, your college resume that you're likely to get into. Pick 2 schools that are target schools. Those are the ones that you are kind of really hoping to get into. They have the program that you want and they also seem to fit your vibe. And then 2 schools that are a reach school. So they have the program that you're into, but they might be a little bit more of a reach for your academic profile and stuff like that. So coming up with your college list, and then you can go through and visit those schools. When you're visiting the schools, the campus tours are a perfect time to ask. I think we mentioned earlier, taking opportunities to ask current students what to do around the campus in the free time, stuff that's not in the general admissions packet of information that you get. That's the perfect time because the student's typically taking you around and they don't have a staff person there to monitor what they're saying. So you'll get the real vibe of what each campus is like on those campus tours, which is one of the reasons why they're so important.
This is still very much kind of part of the exploration phase. The last 2 things here are around cost, and I do think that that's an important thing to at least have a conversation internally, and also start to look at what that actually looks like for universities. For a place like Dartmouth, our total cost of attendance per year is over $90,000. However, we have very generous need-based financial aid, and the number of students who pay nothing to come to Dartmouth, because that is what our need-based financial aid matches, it's really surprising to a lot of students. And that's something that has changed even in the last 5 years. And so it's understandable that in a different generation, that was not the case for students coming to Dartmouth. But there are some of the most expensive universities in the US that also offer the best financial aid coming to them. So getting a sense of that, we have calculators on our website where you plug in numbers from your own past tax return. This is a great season. You've got all those numbers in mind. You can put those into that calculator and get a sense of what might it cost for me to go to this university. And sometimes that is a very different number than you would have expected. But when you're in grade 9, grade 10, grade 11, sometimes I have students saying, what do I need to be doing for my application right now? And one of the biggest things is still developing who you are. And so that means diving into your classes in high school, thinking about what are you enjoying, what do you want to get out of that, because you shouldn't be just drafting an application for all of high school. that comes at the very end. But to have something to put in the application, you need to be developing yourself and thinking about, what do I like in school? What do I care about? What do I want to go to college for? What is the purpose of all of this? And that'll make it much easier when you then get to the end of high school and into senior year, and you're actually starting to put words on the page for your application. So, senior year, if you have the opportunity to visit campuses, I think that's so important. If you don't have the opportunity, look for virtual programs, virtual tours, info sessions, all sorts of stuff like that. I think whenever there's an opportunity to hear from current students, that's wonderful. And find those opportunities to connect with the schools that you're thinking about applying to. That's something I know that, like, we had 2 family weddings the summer before grade 12, and so while my mom and my sister flew to them, my dad and I did like an East Coast road trip and visited 30 colleges, which was way too many, and there was at least one that we like got out of the car and I looked around and I said, nope, and got back in the car. But at the end of that trip, I could articulate what I cared about and what resonated with me in a way that I absolutely could not have before that. I recognize that not everyone has the opportunity to do like a 2-week road trip, but consider how you're gonna be able to kind of get some of that info if you're looking at places that you have not visited before. Senior year is when you actually start making an application account. That looks different for different places. For Dartmouth, it's the common application. Primarily, we also use the QuestBridge system. I'm not going to speak too much about that, but the common application, you go in, you set up an account, that list that you've drafted, you're adding those schools there, you have your spreadsheet that you've used for planning, and you've noted, okay, well, I also want to apply to something that's part of the University of California system, and they have their own application system, so I'm going to set up my Common App, and I'm going to set up my UC application, and that's where you're actually starting to build those things out. Once you've done that, one of the advantages is that then it shows the deadlines and it shows the components. And it says, okay, for Dartmouth, you need to submit the common application. There's a supplement. There are 2 recommendations. This is the deadline. Here's an application fee. And it's all right there. You log in and you have that checklist in front of you. And it's another way to make sure that you're kind of staying on track with that.
One important thing to note about the Common App, if you're thinking about applying for it, and you know that you will qualify for an application fee waiver, a lot of schools, I guess I can't speak for Dartmouth, but for Vermont State University, like, we don't have a code that we can give you for the Common App. But if you qualify for a fee waiver, reach out to the Common App, and they're good about waiving the application fee for you.
Some of the fee waivers are connected. So like if you've qualified for a fee waiver in doing the SAT or something, then that corresponds to kind of qualifying for a fee waiver in other parts of the application. There are also some universities that will waive the fee for anyone who requests it. So if that is a hardship and you are looking at a bunch of $80 application fees stacking up and you're thinking, I don't know that that's going to make sense for me, then reach out to some of those colleges or Google the college's name, fee waiver, see what comes up, and they'll probably have instructions on how you can, if there's a way to get that waived. The flip side of that, I would say that just because a school does not have an application fee is not necessarily a reason that you should be adding it to your application list. I have a niece who I was looking at some of her choices, and there were some schools where I said, you don't want to go to that school? And she said, yeah, but they don't have an application fee. I said, okay, but if you get into that school, would you ever go there? And she said, well, no. I was like, then why is it on your list? So that's not necessarily, that's nice if it's a school that you want to be applying to, but that should not be part of that kind of fit list for you. Applications and financial aid is often a concurrent process. So you are working on your application, which is whether or not you get into the university or the school that you're applying to, and at the same time, you may be applying for financial aid from the institution, maybe also looking at stuff from VSAC, but it's not something where you see if you get in and then you see if you get financial aid. For schools like Dartmouth, we want to be able to tell you at one time, you are admitted and here is exactly what you would be paying. And we can't do that unless you have submitted your application for admission as well as your application for financial aid, and we then make sure that anyone who's getting an admission offer is also getting their financial aid offer at the same time so that you can make an informed decision about that.
On the FAFSA, there's going to be a list where you can list up to 20 different schools. I think it's 20. You can list a bunch of you can list every school that you would realistically be applying to in a year. And then once you hit submit, your FAFSA information is sent to all of those schools. Vermont State University doesn't do financial aid offers until students are admitted, but our office will have your information, so it's similar. So once you are admitted, you'll get your financial aid offer pretty soon after that.
Taking a slight step back, has everyone heard of the Common Application? Okay, great. So some no's, some yeses. The Common Application is a widely used platform where you are putting in like background information and who you are, what school you're at, what courses you're taking grade 12, and then you're sending that same form to 10 different universities rather than doing a specific form for each college. So that will be something that will help you kind of, a lot of schools will exclusively use that, but look on their website of what application format they use. And then the FAFSA is the free application for federal student aid. Typically is available October 1st every fall.
They try their best to have it be October 1st.
There have been some bumpy years. It'll be really smooth when all of you do it. That is where it's tied into the federal government, federal aid, and it allows colleges to get a sense of your family's financial situation and use that in whatever process our individual schools use. So we would both be using the FAFSA. We might be interpreting it in different ways and then applying our own policies to that. Some universities may also or separately have something called the CSS profile. That is a form that is through the College Board, and it's a much more detailed financial aid application. For us, that allows us to kind of get into more detail and ideally meet a family's need more accurately. Some schools don't require that. So again, go on to the website for those schools that you're preparing applications for and add that to your spreadsheet that you've put together of all the forms that you're going to need to do for those schools.
For Vermont residents, there's the VSAC grant application that you can fill out. So that's just a third form. It's not sent directly to the schools that you're applying for. It goes to VSAC, who then communicates that information to the schools that you list on the grant application.
All right, we're going to switch modes a little bit now and dive a little bit more into the actual application process. So this is another, there is a printout that's over at the VSAC table that can get you started. You might need to kind of adjust it or add some fields or take some things away. But these are some things that you might want to track about things that you possibly need to submit for a college application. One, the application itself. Common Application, I mentioned, there's something called the Coalition for College, which is a different platform that some colleges use. The QuestBridge application, QuestBridge is really based around high need-based scholarships. Different universities use that in different ways. For Dartmouth, we assess financial need and meet financial need equally for students, whether they're applying through QuestBridge or not. That money all comes from Dartmouth. QuestBridge is not giving you money. But there might be other schools where they say you can only get a full scholarship if you're applying through QuestBridge if that college is a member of QuestBridge. So that might be something you look into. The vast majority of our applicants are coming through the Common Application. If there's an application fee or fee waiver, look into that, make a note of it. Almost always, you're going to need to submit some kind of transcript from your school, but this is typically falling into the camp of what a school counselor is submitting for you. So in the Common Application, there's a space where you're adding the names of some of your supporters. So you're adding a school counselor. They are going to have some documents that then they submit on your behalf. Your transcript, which shows what classes you've taken, how you've done in those classes. A school report, which gives some background information about your school. How big is your school? What's the curriculum? Does it offer APs or not? What other kinds of things should we know about that as we're evaluating you? Test scores, there's a whole world of policies around test scores. So that's something you definitely need to check with an individual university about. What's your policy for test scores?
We are test optional, so you're welcome to submit it. If you ever see any college that says test optional, generally they will still accept your test scores. You can always submit them if you're like proud of them, you feel that you've done well and you want to include them on your application. But if you see test optional, we don't need them to render admissions decisions or do merit scholarship evaluations.
There are some universities that do not look at test scores. Even if you submit them, it is kind of not part of what they judge students on their campus, and they don't want to see it in your application. There are other universities that require some kind of test score, and when I'm talking about test scores, I mean SAT or ACT. The biggest difference between the SAT and the ACT is that the SAT has historically been taken on the East and West Coast, and the ACT has historically been taken in the central US. We don't have any preference for one or the other. We just see differences geographically of where they're coming from. They are also becoming like a little more similar. So the science section on the ACT is now optional, used to be required. SAT doesn't have a science section. What I would recommend if you haven't taken either of them is to do a sample test of both. See if there's one that you enjoy more, as much as one can enjoy standardized testing, and maybe study for and take that, or see what's available and has seats open where you are. Dartmouth and a number of other universities, so we require testing. We look at testing in context. What that means is that a 700 can mean different things for different students. For some students coming from a school, that is the highest score that of anyone coming out of that school. For other students, you're in a school where there's a lot of support and kind of and preparation for those tests, that there's a culture of taking that test. Students are prepared for that, maybe as even part of the curriculum of the school, and maybe a 700 in one of the sections is kind of on the lower end of students coming out of that school. We've found at Dartmouth, we did some research as we came back to required testing coming out of COVID, that we found that if you have a high test score in the context of the school you're coming from, that bodes well for success at Dartmouth, even if that test score is below our average of the incoming class at Dartmouth. And that's something that I think is really important to understand, because a lot of students go onto the website, they see an average test score for a university, they think, oh, well, I'm below that, so I'm never gonna get in. Half of our students got in with a score below that. That is what average means. It's the middle. Half of the students had below that. So testing, GPA, all of these things are one factor among many. A lot of times all these things add up and kind of tell us the same story about you and builds evidence, but there's not gonna be a time usually where like that one element makes or breaks your application. Recommendations, essays, maybe a resume or an interview or an arts portfolio, something else, that's gonna be dependent on the university that you're applying to, whether that's required, recommended, optional, never included. There's a whole range of different ways that that might be taken into account.
I will say about the application essay, if you have any, like, for example, if your freshman year you didn't do super well in your classes and you just want an opportunity to address kind of what was going on in your life or something, the essay is a really great place to do that. And we will look at, we read your essays and we look at what's called a positive grade trend on your high school transcripts. So if you want to address something like that maybe academically affected you in the past, but tell us what steps you've taken to improve, we take that into account when we review applications, and positive grade trends on transcripts look really good.
Don't let us have a lot of questions, I think is something to keep in mind. If there is something that happened that has an explanation, but you don't share that explanation with us, we don't know it. That's also something to talk about your school counselor, with your school counselor, because they are an advocate for you in this space. I want to spend a moment talking about this idea of selectivity. So selectivity is the idea that a class, an incoming class of freshmen at a college, has a certain number of spaces, because that is the number of beds that we have. If anyone comes to Hanover, you will see that Dartmouth is furiously building new housing for our undergraduate students because we cannot grow as an institution if we do not have space for students. And the first thing is making sure our current students have enough space. But then if you have more people applying for the class than there are spaces, then there's this thing where it's not just about are you qualified, could you be successful, but of the qualified students, if that is higher than the number of spots in the class, we have to somehow limit that more. So then the question shifts from just being qualified to then this idea of fit. And what are you bringing to the college? So you might be an excellent student, but maybe you're applying or you're really interested in a program that we simply don't have. That's a pretty kind of overt idea of fit. So you say you want to exclusively do an undergraduate major in business, you're applying to Dartmouth, we do not have an undergraduate major in business. We have some classes, we do not have that program. You want to study real estate, we do not have that program. So that is something where it doesn't really matter anymore how strong your grades are, we're not a great fit for you. But then there's also this idea of cultural fit and the voice that you bring into the classroom, the experiences that you've had. And that's something, going back to that very first slide, if you have not taken a little bit of time to think about that, because every single one of you students in this room, you have a voice, you have an experience. Oftentimes at this point in high school, you've been around a lot of other folks who have a very similar experience and a very similar voice. But you might end up in a college where you're going to meet people on your first day, whether it's your roommate or someone else in your class, and think, wow, I've never met someone who XYZ, who thinks this, who has done that, who is from that place. And they are going to be meeting you and thinking, wow, I've never met someone from a town that has less than 1,000 people in it. What do they do there? And this is something that it hasn't been a big thing to you because it hasn't mattered yet. But think about what is that voice, that experience that you bring, and what do you want to get out of your college experience? And that's where those recommendation letters, the essay, we're getting beyond the numbers of your application and we're getting into who are you, and we're not just filling a classroom, but we're building a community. So the more selective a university is, the more these things beyond the numbers start to play into it. The reality of a place like Dartmouth is that the vast majority of our applicant pool is absolutely qualified. They are excellent students. They could come to Dartmouth. They could be very successful at Dartmouth. We do not have space for them. So then we're looking at these other things. And I think that's just an important mindset to have if you end up with any schools on your list that are on that more selective side of the spectrum. All right. Yeah.
So I happen to work as a psychotherapist, which is probably why I'm asking this. But selectivity is another word for competitiveness. Am I right? And I'm guessing that most kids in grade and high school, they're not really competing with each other. They're trying to get good grades and all that. But how do people in this process deal with that pressure or that fact that this is a competitive experience?
Yeah, great question. So I would say that competition in the selection process is different than the culture on a campus, and that might be something to pay attention to. I would say there are some universities that have a highly selective admission process, but students on that campus would not describe that as a competitive environment. And it's kind of, yes, it's difficult to get in. There are a lot of other students vying for that spot, but it's a very collaborative, supportive environment on campus. I would also say that selectivity does not equal quality, and selectivity does not equal fit. Just because a school is more selective does not mean it's a good or great school for you to go to. It also does not necessarily mean that it has the kind of highest return on investment for you. So I think sometimes, that's my issue with ranking lists, is that there's this idea that if it's top ranked, and often selectivity is part of the ranking criteria that like US News and World Report will use, like, does that matter to you? Are you someone who wants to go to some place just so you can say, oh, well, I got in and most people did not? Maybe that does matter to you and you want to have that as a bragging right. I don't think it should, but maybe there's something else that is important to you there. So I think that's, yeah, don't equate those kind of two things. We are running short on time, so we're going to speed through some of this. So this idea of match and fit, there might be an institution that you really love the environment of it, you love the academic programs that are offered, you love the location, but maybe it's one where it's not academically kind of the best match. And imagine how your application might land if we're a school that's saying the majority of students coming here are students who have really excelled in their high school curriculum, and you're thinking, I'm doing well, maybe I'm not a student who's kind of towards the top of my class, maybe that's not the right match, and maybe you look for an institution that's a very similar profile, but is less selective, or has less students vying for that spot. Something that also comes into play with that is institutions that offer merit scholarships. So merit meaning strength, academic strength, talent, something like that. If you're looking for places with merit scholarships, you want to be a student who is going to stand out in that pool. And so that might be a school that is less selective, where they're going to say, wow, this is a really strong applicant in our pool. We don't usually see students with that. And that's where maybe looking at middle range of test scores or GPA will help you kind of gauge that a little bit of how you might kind of compare in that space. Course selection, as you're thinking about courses, some schools are looking at academic rigor, so if you have the option to do a more rigorous class, and sometimes students will email us and say, should I do the AP class, but maybe I'm gonna get a B in it, or should I do the easier class and I know I could get an A+ in it? Our annoying response is that we want you to challenge yourself and also do well in it, ideally. You can absolutely have a B on your transcript and get into a place like Dartmouth. I would say that it's far less likely to get into a place like Dartmouth if your school offers 15 AP classes and you have gone out of your way to take 0 of them. That is not a student who wants to be in the academic rigor of a place like Dartmouth. That's a question or a conversation to be having with your teachers and counselor earlier on in high school, because sometimes you might find that you kind of have to be in a certain track to get into that. I'm going to skip through the rest of this, make sure we have a little time for questions at the end. And maybe just the last thing, this idea of like holistic review is just going back to this idea that like there's not one thing that we're looking for in an application, that you have that and then you're in. Or if you don't write the perfect essay, you're not going to get into Dartmouth. It's all these different things that come together. And for one applicant, it is something in the essay that like was really impactful and really sticks with us. And that is a huge part of kind of what drives that application forward. And everything else is strong and supports that. For another applicant, their essay was good. It was fine. It was not the thing that rose the most in the application, and there is something else there that is the thing that kind of rose the most. Other students, it looks a little different for every student, and that's how we end up with a class that is not all the same. They don't all have the same talents. They weren't all editor of the newspaper in high school. They weren't all kind of doing the same things. They bring different talents and ideas. So again, when students ask us like, well, how do I get in? There's not sort of a specific pathway to that, the more selective you're getting. Anything that you want to add on that?
I would just say, like, for Vermont State University, we're an institution that's focused more on access. So we want everybody in Vermont who wants, or in Vermont and elsewhere, who wants a post-secondary education to be able to get that. So we do have all those things on our application, the essay, letters of recommendation. For most of our programs, they're optional. We just need the application form and your high school transcript. We, of course, want to know everything about you, like everything that you want to share with us for our admissions process. But really, as long as you graduate from high school and you did respectively well, you can get into most of our programs. Some programs are more selective, particularly our allied health programs that get you licensure to practice medicine with, sorry, not medicine, but like nursing and to work with patients in a clinical setting. Those are more selective, but for the majority of our programs, we just want you to have the opportunity to get a degree.
All right, I am going to skip ahead. So on the VSAC website, there's a list and links to a bunch of different resources. If you are feeling like I don't even know where to start, and I don't feel like I have a college counselor in my high school that can help me, there are some resources that will absolutely sort of fill that gap. One, Khan Academy, they have free SAT prep resources. I would always go with free resources before you're paying someone for prep. They also have a whole college admissions course on Khan Academy. You can go through all of it. You can go through just a few different parts of it. But that's about, you know, taking responsibility and learning these things if you don't feel like you have other supporters that can do that. Appley is where some of the other kind of one-page resources are from. They also have a whole set of downloadable resources and guides and things like that. Some of you may feel like I have a college counseling office that has a whole curriculum on this, and I feel like I've got what I need from them. Great. If that doesn't feel like the situation for you, then these are some great resources. And then CollegeWise is a community-based organization, also has free resources that will help students explore all these options, and then always reach out to folks in the admissions offices at universities, and we're happy to help as well. We covered a lot of ground. I always think there's going to be more time for Q&A, I'm sorry. But any questions that we can get to? Yeah, there's one in the back there.
I just wanted to get an example of a student who had that strong voice, or just an example of an admittee who's really stood out.
Yeah. So I'm always like hesitant to give an example because then I worry that every applicant from Vermont the next year will somehow develop into that profile. And I find like the ones that stand out are ones that I would not be able to like anticipate necessarily. But in terms of thinking about your voice, one thing, so there's a network called the STARS Network, which is small town and rural students. And there are about 32 colleges that are part of that. Dartmouth is one of them. And I think it's a signal that there are more and more colleges who are realizing that a rural voice is actually not always a common voice at your school. And so why might that matter? You're in an engineering classroom. You have a challenge that you're doing, and you know, the outcome of that is something that people think, oh, this is gonna make everything better for everyone. And how often have folks who are in more rural parts of Vermont kind of seen some technology or some solution where you're like, that does not work here. It does not work. I don't see how Amazon is gonna use drones and deliver things to my door. I don't see how self-driving cars are gonna navigate mud season on my back road. Like, no one with a rural voice was in that room when that was being developed. And that doesn't mean that that's not a great idea, but that means that there's a gap somewhere. And so whether that is looking at engineering solutions, whether that is looking at healthcare policy, education policy in Vermont right now, if anyone else was at town meetings recently, hot topic, those are things that you need voices from different backgrounds. And so maybe that is, you know, a voice or an experience that you have that kind of comes into that. And on the other side of the table, I'm thinking, okay, we've got these policy government courses. I don't just want students who are seeing this from an urban perspective or from just a US perspective. I also work with our international students. I want all those different kinds of voices. And maybe you haven't figured that out entirely. I don't mean to say that you need to kind of like know exactly how you're gonna change the world. But those are some of the things that students might bring. All right, I think someone else is coming into this room next. We will be back at our tables if anyone has questions. Thank you so much. You can find us on our websites.
Have a good one, thank you.